Hi everyone, I'm Jenni Lisacek, and I'm super excited to share with you today a preview into some of our courses on the fundamentals of photography. We've designed this module to be a fresh outlook on fundamental photographic concepts and how they apply specifically to wildlife photography. There's so much more to cover than what we can explain in a short video, but hopefully these previews will give you a bit of insight into what you can expect in our full photography course. Do you ever wonder why you like some images more than others? In the full version of the composition lesson, I'll be covering the essentials of a visual language that will help you understand the answer to this question. So if you're looking to compose a unique photo, one of the most important things you can analyze is the elements within a photo. You can look for patterns, textures, shapes, asymmetry as well, lines, and other details. So this lion cub is facing me with her body position and with her eyes. This is when I would decide in most cases that I would want to center the subject because there's this element of symmetry present. Symmetry is very pleasing to the eye and it creates a sense of peace and orderliness, and it can help you create a minimalistic photo. It can help you place emphasis on your subject, and it can also be a powerful tool to amplify your subject. Your subject doesn't always need to be perfectly symmetrical, but looking for symmetrical elements in a photo can help you decide how to compose a photo. So this elephant isn't perfectly symmetrical if you look at its trunk. It's not perfectly even on both sides. It doesn't run through the center of the image. But if you look at its ears, which occupy more space in the image, they actually create a beautiful symmetrical heart shape, which made me want to decide to center this elephant.
I think a lot of people overlook the most essential and basic element in photography: light. I mean, do you really understand what it is? How your camera captures it? And the simple science behind it? Don't worry, we won't get too technical. But in my lessons, I'm going to explain things a little bit differently from what you might have heard before. I'll start broad and then focus on the theory that will set you up to be a total champion of light out in the field.
Okay, so exposure. Exposure is basically the amount of light that your camera captures. And you're probably thinking, exactly what light am I talking about? The available light. And this available light is essentially the range of light in a scene. So this means the difference between the shadows and the highlights, right? And that range is defined as the available light. You're probably thinking, okay, well, what does that mean? So throughout the day, there are varying amounts of available light. And understanding how to approach the exposure for each of these scenarios is critical for capturing the optimal image data in the field that will allow you the greatest flexibility for editing on the computer later. And we'll go through each of them individually. I generally try to expose towards the right rather than exposing for the midtone exposure, because I know that anything that is captured within the dynamic range of the sensor, I can move that data around and I can actually manipulate it later on. And if it's in the highlight range of the camera's dynamic range, then in my experience, I have had a lot more flexibility in being able to edit my images and post-process them with this type of data. So one of the considerations that you want to keep in mind for ETTR is the trade-off principle applies for high contrast situations as well.
Do you ever look at your camera and wonder what each of these camera modes mean and how they apply to wildlife photography? I'm going to go through each of them with live examples in the field and explain the optimal conditions for setting up your camera to capture the best image quality with editing in mind. So let's see what Program Auto does. Okay, we have our trusty draft subject here. What I want you guys to pay attention to is the numbers in the bottom left here. You can see the relationship between aperture and shutter speed. So as I have a wider aperture, smaller aperture number, like f4, then I can have a faster shutter speed because I'm allowing a lot of light in through the aperture. Therefore, the shutter speed can be quicker. And if I chose a aperture like f16, then you'd see that the shutter would go down to maybe 1/30th to compensate for this. The shot was taken at 500 millimeters at 1/1000, f4, and ISO 100. A problem with shooting in Program Auto is that if you wanted to have a desired aperture, like f8, then you're not able to control the exact shutter speed that's needed for that particular focal length of the lens. So how do you know which aperture, which shutter, which ISO to shoot when you're going to a particular scene? I'm going to make this very simple for you. Later on in this module, I'm going to give you different settings and different things to consider when photographing wildlife that are doing different things, or they have different behaviors, or there's different lighting conditions. The basic thing that I'm going to introduce to you is making manual mode easy. There's no need to complicate manual mode. We just need to go about it systematically so that you understand why you're choosing a certain aperture, why you're shooting with a certain shutter speed, and then how your ISO is affecting your overall image. So the first thing that I would do is when I'm assessing a scene, I typically want to have the widest aperture possible. So on this particular lens, I'm shooting at a 5.6 most of the time.
I hope you enjoyed these previews and that you can understand how important these fundamentals can be to help you master your wildlife photography skills. Be sure to look out for the pre-sale email on Monday, July 13th, and check your inbox for the final lesson preview tomorrow.